My son and his wife left me in a wheelchair at O'Hare Airport while boarding a $40,000 cruise without me. They boarded a $40,000 luxury cruise without me. That phone call changed everything. Welcome to Men's True Revenge Stories. Grab your snacks, sit back, and remember, the people in this story had every chance to do the right thing. They just chose the wrong one. Like and subscribe. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 71 years old. I live in a $1.2 million colonial home in Naperville, Illinois. 3 months before the airport, I signed a power of attorney. I didn't know yet the document would save me. I didn't know yet that the county recorder would file it before sunset. 8 months ago, I suffered a severe spinal compression injury. I tripped on an uneven sidewalk outside my grocery store. The fall fractured 2 lumbar vertebrae simultaneously. My orthopedic surgeon, Dr. Heller, wrote the medical restriction directly into my chart. No stairs, no prolonged travel, no international flights. He signed and dated that letter on August 3rd. I didn't know yet that letter would become evidence. My son's name is Derek. His wife's name is Renata. Derek offered to move into my home temporarily to help with my recovery. I gave him a spare key to the main entrance. That was my first mistake. I didn't know yet that cruise ticket would cost him everything. I spent 40 years as a structural engineering consultant. I designed the load-bearing frameworks for commercial skyscrapers across 7 states. I retired with a net worth of $4.2 million. I kept a disciplined investment portfolio. I maintained a diversified real estate trust. I built everything with precise, deliberate intention. Derek is 43 years old. He works in middle management at a regional logistics company. He has always believed my estate would solve every financial problem he ever created. He married Renata 6 years ago. Renata has never held a full-time job in her adult life. She views my retirement savings as a personal funding account. Derek and Renata brought 2 adult sons from Renata's previous relationship. Dylan was 22. Brandon was 19. I treated them as my own grandchildren for 6 years. I paid $74,000 in private school tuition for both boys. I contributed to their college savings accounts. They called me Grandpa Gerald at every holiday dinner. This was not the first time Derek had monetized my goodwill. 3 years ago, he asked me to co-sign a $95,000 home equity loan. He said it was for structural repairs. The disbursements showed a $22,000 kitchen renovation, a $14,000 home theater installation, a $9,500 landscaping project. Structural repairs accounted for less than 8%. I paid 11 months of minimums when he fell behind. 2 years ago, Renata presented a private equity pitch at my dining table, a wellness supplement brand. She used phrases like ground floor positioning. I gave her $25,000. The brand dissolved in 14 months. She never mentioned the money again. 1 year ago, Derek asked me to guarantee a $50,000 business credit line. The consulting practice never launched. The line was drawn to $38,000. The bank called me when Derek stopped paying. I covered it without a word. In total contributed over 3 years, $190,000. They left me in a wheelchair. I agreed to the trip. That decision requires explanation. I agreed because I needed to see exactly how far they would take this. I needed documented evidence of their conduct. I needed witnesses. I needed a moment they could not later reframe or explain away. O'Hare International Airport provided all of it. At exactly 9:12 a.m., we arrived at Terminal 5 departures. The morning was gray and bitterly cold. A private car service delivered us to the international curb. Derek checked the luggage at the curb porter station. Renata organized the boarding passes on her phone. I was in my wheelchair. My carry-on bag was on my lap. My passport was in my jacket pocket. My phone was fully charged to 100%. Terminal 5 was loud with the particular energy of early departures, families with children, business travelers pulling hard-sided cases. An announcement echoed overhead in 3 languages. No one noticed an old man in a wheelchair near the check-in counter. That invisibility was about to become very useful. At the counter, a young porter named Marcus approached me. His name tag was blue and white. He was perhaps 25 years old. He asked professionally if I required any assistance. I told him I would need his attention shortly. He nodded and stepped back to a polite, professional distance. The check-in agent reviewed our documents at window 7. She pulled Derek aside at 9:34 a.m. I watched their conversation from 20 feet away. Derek's shoulders dropped. He nodded 4 times. He handed documents back across the counter. He walked back to me. "Dad," Derek said, "there's a problem with your boarding documentation. The ship's medical team requires a physician clearance form signed within 72 hours of departure. We didn't know about this requirement. Dr. Heller's office is closed today." I looked at my son. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "It means," Derek said carefully, "that you can't board today." People were boarding around us. A family of 4 moved past with rolling suitcases. No one realized I wasn't supposed to stay behind. "You could fly to meet the ship in Barcelona," Renata said. She had already worked out the alternative, in real time, within seconds. An alternative that required me to travel alone, in a wheelchair, across an ocean, to catch a moving ship in a foreign city. "Or wait in the airport lounge," Derek added. "It is fully accessible." I looked at the departure board. I looked at the gate signage. I looked at my son's face. He was already angled slightly toward the security checkpoint. His body had already decided. "Give me a moment," I said. They moved toward the departure gate. They did not stop. They did not look back. They walked past security at 9:47 a.m. They disappeared into the terminal. My son and his wife left me in a wheelchair at O'Hare Airport, among strangers, in the cold morning light, without once looking back. I sat completely still for exactly 90 seconds. Marcus, the young porter, appeared beside me. He had been watching from the assistant's desk. "Sir," he said quietly, "can I help you?" "I need a quiet corner near an outlet," I said. He wheeled me to a less congested section near gate H14. He plugged my charger into the wall outlet. He brought me a bottle of water without being asked. He left a business card on the armrest of my wheelchair. He said he would be nearby. I thanked him. I dialed Leonard Parrish at 9:52 a.m. "Leonard," I said, "execute the power of attorney revocation immediately. File it with the Cook County Recorder today. Then initiate the full trust restructuring we discussed. I need your verbal authorization on record," Leonard said. I provided it. "Scope of restructuring?" Leonard asked. "Remove Derek Whitmore as primary beneficiary of the Whitmore Family Trust," I instructed. "You designate the Naperville Community Foundation as primary institutional beneficiary. Establish a restricted civil engineering scholarship subtrust. Derek's access reduces to a fixed, irrevocable annual stipend of $18,000. Renata Whitmore receives nothing. Dylan and Brandon retain their existing college fund contributions. Locked until age 25, restricted to verified educational expenses only." "And the co-signed credit card?" I asked. "I'll contact the card issuer directly," Leonard confirmed. "The $8,400 deposit qualifies for dispute under unauthorized transaction grounds. The county recorder will confirm the POA revocation filing by end of business today." "Proceed," I said. I ended the call at 10:04 a.m. I placed the phone on my knee. I looked at the departure board. Their flight gate showed boarding complete. The massive, irreversible legal machinery was now in motion. That was the phone call that ended their inheritance. If you've listened this far, please subscribe. 97% of people watch but don't subscribe, and it means everything to our channel. I did not take a flight to Barcelona. I called the private car service. They returned me to Naperville within the hour. The colonial home was completely silent. Derek and Renata's personal belongings were still in the guest bedroom. Their toiletries were in the bathroom. A half-finished bottle of French wine stood on the kitchen counter. They had fully intended to return here after the cruise. This was still home base for them. Every piece of their daily life was still embedded in my $1.2 million house. They had walked out of O'Hare and onto a luxury ship with the complete confidence that everything here would be waiting for them unchanged. I sat quietly at the mahogany desk in my study. I made a list, not an emotional list, a structural list, every action that needed to take place and in what precise order. Item 1, locksmith. Item 2, bank fraud division. Item 3, confirm Leonard's POA revocation with county recorder. Item 4, retrieve Marcus's contact information from his business card. Item 5, contact Patricia Chen. I began with the locksmith. He rekeyed every exterior lock by 2 p.m. He changed the garage keypad code. He updated the security system master PIN. I called the bank fraud division at 2:45 p.m. I provided Dr. Heller's written medical restriction letter dated August 3rd. I provided the cruise company booking confirmation showing only 2 passenger names. I provided the credit card transaction timestamp confirming the $8,400 deposit was processed on October 16th. 3 days before Derek had his carefully staged conversation with me in the living room. 3 days before he placed that glossy brochure on my coffee table with practiced casualness. The fraud analyst opened a formal investigation file at 3:15 p.m. She flagged the transaction for dispute. She noted the charges occurred prior to any authorization from the primary account holder. She told me I would receive a formal case number within 24 hours. The Cook County Sheriff's Office confirmed the filing receipt the same afternoon. I contacted Patricia Chen next. She was 73 years old, a retired school principal who had lived next door for 22 years. I explained the situation to her calmly and in sequential order. She listened without interrupting. She set down her teacup. "Gerald," Patricia said, "Bish, I raised 6 children. I know exactly what this is." She agreed to serve as a civilian witness if the situation required it. I retrieved Marcus's business card from my jacket pocket. I called the number. He answered on the second ring. I explained who I was. I explained what had happened at Terminal 5 on October 19th. I explained that I might require a formal written statement from him. He said he remembered me clearly. He said he would be happy to provide whatever documentation I needed. He was at the airport for another shift that afternoon. He took my information and said he would be in contact with Leonard Parrish's office by the following morning. I called Derek's cell phone at 5 p.m. He did not answer. He was likely at sea somewhere west of Ireland. I left one voicemail. My voice was completely level. Not a single decibel above normal. Derek's texts began arriving on day 3 of the cruise. The first, "Dad, worried about you. Are you okay?" The second, 4 hours later, "Tried calling. Please respond." The third, "Getting very concerned. I responded to none of them for 72 hours. On day 4, I sent a single reply. "I am comfortable and well. Enjoy your trip. We will speak on your return." Derek called immediately. "Leonard Parrish contacted me," Derek said. His voice was stripped of its usual smoothness. "He said there's been a trust restructuring." "That's correct," I said. 7 seconds of silence. On day 7, Derek escalated. He called my younger sister Margaret in Tucson. He told her I'd made irrational financial decisions while emotionally compromised. He used the phrase "not himself" 4 times. He suggested she fly out to assess my condition. He specifically cited the power of attorney revocation as evidence of instability. Margaret called me within the hour. "Gerald," she said, "Derek called me. He's very concerned." He says you revoked his legal authority while in an extreme emotional state. He used the phrase not in his right mind, Gerald. He said it twice. Margaret, I said, I'm in my home office. I'm reading an engineering journal. I've been awake since 6 this morning. I took my medications at 7:15. I spoke to my attorney at 9:52 a.m. by phone. I am not in any state other than entirely competent. He also said the trust restructuring could affect the grandchildren, Margaret said. He mentioned Dylan and Brandon. The boys' college funds are preserved in full, I replied. We locked to verified educational expenses. They are completely untouched. Derek knows this because Leonard's office communicated it to him in writing. He also said Renata is devastated, Margaret added. Renata left me in a wheelchair at O'Hare, I said. She booked a $40,000 cruise on my co-signed card. My name was never on the reservation. I can send you the booking confirmation if you need to see it. A long pause. Send it, Margaret said. I emailed it to her while she was still on the line. I will call Derek, Margaret said, and I will tell him exactly what you just told me. Derek did not contact anyone in my network again after that conversation. On day 11, Renata sent an email. Subject: Please read this, Gerald. 4 paragraphs. Her difficult childhood. Derek struggles with self-worth. The cruise was necessary for their mental health. I had always had financial security as a buffer against hardship. No apology, no acknowledgement of the wheelchair, no acknowledgement of the credit card, no acknowledgement that I had been left alone in a foreign terminal. I read it twice. I forwarded it to Leonard. He noted it for the file. Then I read it a third time. I read it specifically looking for any sentence that acknowledged what had happened at O'Hare. I read it looking for the word wheelchair. I read it looking for the word airport. I read it looking for the word alone. None of those words appeared. The 4 paragraphs described a man who had overreacted, a man whose financial decisions had been distorted by the stress of injury, a man whose family had genuinely struggled to accommodate an unexpectedly difficult situation. At no point in 4 paragraphs did Renata place herself at Terminal 5 on October 19th. At no point did she describe the moment they walked away. At no point did she acknowledge Marcus. At no point did she acknowledge that my name had never been on the reservation. I placed the laptop on the mahogany desk. I sat for a moment. The manipulation was clean and consistent. She had been doing this for 6 years. The wellness pitch, the home equity loan disbursements, the credit card deposit, the email, all of it followed the same load pattern: maximum pressure, minimum accountability, always framed as someone else's emotional failure. I had spent 40 years identifying that pattern in concrete and steel. I recognized it immediately when I saw it in people. That evening, Derek sent a single text. Father, I would like to sit down and speak properly when I land, I replied 2 hours later. I will be home. That was all. Derek and Renata returned on November 9th. They arrived at 11:40 p.m. Derek used the original key. It did not work. He tried the garage keypad code. It did not work. I watched from the darkened front room. I did not turn on any lights. He knocked. I waited. He knocked a second time, harder. I opened the door. I was dressed in pressed slacks and a crisp shirt. I was not in the wheelchair. My physical therapy had advanced considerably in 22 days. I was walking with a single support cane. Derek stopped. He had expected to find a fragile, recovering man in a hospital robe. He found his father standing in the doorway in pressed trousers with the quiet stillness of a man who has spent 40 years identifying load-bearing structures. Renata stood 1 step behind him on the porch. She held a large, duty-free shopping bag. She had purchased gifts. She had bought gifts as a buffer. Dad, Derek said, we need to talk. Yes, I agreed. We do. I opened the door. I made them enter single file past me. I directed them not to the family room. not to the comfortable sofa where difficult conversations had always been softened by familiarity. I directed them to the formal sitting room, high-backed chairs, solid walnut table, the room where I had always signed serious documents. They sat. I remained standing near the window with my cane. I placed a folder on the table. Derek didn't open the folder immediately. He looked at it. He looked at me. He looked at Renata. He placed both hands flat on the table. He exhaled slowly. Then he reached for it. Derek extracted the documents. The first was the Cook County Recorder's certified confirmation of the power of attorney revocation. Filed October 19th. Time-stamped 2:41 p.m. The second was the $4.2 million Whitmore Family Trust restructuring summary from Leonard's office. The third was the bank's fraud investigation notice confirming the $8,400 deposit dispute. Dr. Heller's signed restriction letter dated August 3rd was attached to the dispute file. The fourth was the cruise company's passenger manifest, 2 names. Gerald Whitmore was not among them. Derek read each page slowly. He turned each one with great care. Renata watched his face. "Dad," Derek said. His voice had gone very quiet. "This is extreme." "Over vacation." "Over being left in a wheelchair at O'Hare International Airport," I corrected, "at 9:47 in the morning. By my son and his wife." Without a backward glance. "You could have flown to meet us," Renata said. Her patience for strategy had finally run out. "We had a plan for you to join in Barcelona." "You had a plan that required me to travel internationally," I said, "alone, in a medically restricted condition. To catch a ship I was never booked on, in a cabin that was never reserved for me. Using a travel route you improvised in 30 seconds at the check-in counter." Renata opened her mouth. I did not pause. "You were never planning to bring me," I said. "He won't notice the transaction." "That is what you said the night before the trip." Standing in the guest bedroom with the door open. The room went completely silent. Renata's face did not move. But something behind her eyes shifted very quickly. Derek stood. "I want to speak to Leonard directly," he said. "Leonard works for me," I replied. "He will communicate with your own legal counsel." "This will tie up the estate for years," Derek said. His voice finally lost its restraint. "You are doing this to punish us." "The boys' college funds are fully intact," I said, "restricted to verified educational expenses at age 25. They are not being punished for your decisions." The front doorbell rang. Renata looked at the door. She looked at me. "Are you expecting someone?" Derek asked. "Yes," I said. I pressed a button on my watch. The front door release clicked open automatically. Leonard Parrish entered in a gray suit with a leather briefcase. He had driven from downtown Naperville at my request. And behind him walked Patricia Chen, my neighbor of 22 years, a retired school principal, present as a witness, and behind Patricia walked Marcus, the young airport porter from O'Hare. He held a notarized affidavit in a manila envelope. His written statement described the conditions in which he had found me at gate H14, alone, in a wheelchair, at 9:52 a.m. on October 19th. Derek stared at the 3 people standing in his father's formal sitting room. He stared for a very long time. He looked at Leonard. Leonard looked back at him with the precise blankness of a man who has witnessed this exact moment many times in 30 years of estate law. He looked at Patricia. Patricia looked at him with the quiet, level stare of a retired school principal who has seen every form of misbehavior a human being can produce. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at him with the simple, uncomplicated directness of a 25-year-old man holding a notarized affidavit that described exactly what he had witnessed at gate H14. Derek sat back down. He put his face in both hands. Renata spoke. "Mr. Parrish," Renata said. Her voice had shifted entirely. The practiced warmth was completely gone. What remained was purely transactional. Is there any instrument that would allow us to negotiate a revised distribution? A structured settlement that takes into account Derek's contribution to Gerald's care. I manage Gerald's estate, Leonard said. I don't negotiate on Gerald's behalf without his instruction. Renata looked at me. Gerald, she said, you built this estate for your family. Derek worked alongside you for 20 years. He lost sleep over your recovery. He moved his life here to help you. I listened to this. I let her finish. He moved his life here to access my assets, I said. The deposit was processed 3 days before he suggested the trip. You knew the physician clearance requirement would surface at check-in. You booked airline seats for 2. You never booked a seat for me. Renata stood very still. You tried to bury me quietly, I said, so I buried your future first. I am an engineer. I plan load-bearing structures. I built this one over 22 days while you were visiting Monaco. Renata stood first. She walked to the doorway. She stopped with her back to the room. This is not over, she said. It is not, I agreed. Your attorney will receive communications from Leonard's office beginning Monday morning. The Cook County fraud investigation is ongoing. The credit card dispute is an active federal record. She walked down the hallway. She took the duty-free bag. She walked past the front door slowly. She did not take anything from the guest bedroom. She pulled the door shut behind her. Derek remained seated for several minutes. He looked at the documents. He looked at Leonard. He looked at me. Dad, Derek said, I'm sorry. I looked at my son for a long time. I know you are, I said, but sorry does not rebuild load-bearing structures. It only acknowledges they collapsed. Derek stood. He picked up his coat. He walked to the door. He was slower than I expected. He did not stride out. He moved with the particular heaviness of a man who has just watched every assumption he built his life on collapse simultaneously. The assumption that the estate would absorb his poor decisions, the assumption that I was too ill to respond, the assumption that silence meant acceptance, the assumption that $40,000 spent on a luxury cruise was less visible than a signature on a fraudulent deposit. All of it gone. He paused in the hallway. Where am I supposed to go tonight? He asked. This was the same man who had walked through security at O'Hare without looking back. He had not asked where I was supposed to go that morning. I imagine you will figure it out, I said. He left. The door closed. Leonard and I reviewed the final documents at the walnut table. Patricia Chen sat in the corner chair and said nothing. Marcus waited respectfully in the hallway. The county recorder's certification was fully executed. The trust restructuring was legally unassailable. The credit card dispute was formally filed. By that weekend, the neighborhood already knew. The country club email chain, the parent network from the grandchildren's school, the Naperville social calendar. By sunset, everyone in the country club already knew what happened. I walked to my home office. I moved slowly and deliberately with the cane. I passed the front door slowly and locked it behind me without looking back. I sat at my mahogany desk. I opened the structural engineering journal I had bookmarked 8 months ago. The page had been waiting. The house had never been this quiet before. The ledger was perfectly balanced. Join our community for more unfiltered family stories.